It Chapter 2 is the follow-up to the first film from 2017 and takes place 27 years after the last film. All the members of the Losers Club are now adults and are called back to their hometown of Derry, Maine by Mike Hanlon after It comes back and starts killing people again. Now it's up to the reunited Losers Club to make good on that promise they made in the summer of 1989 to finish it once and for all. I was beyond excited to see this film since I adored the first film, and the book is my personal favorite Stephen King novel. It 2017 captured the spirit and essence of the kids section of the book perfectly, was bolstered by a strong cast, great directing, well-built and suspenseful scares, a marvelous musical score, and some terrific cinematography. With the same creative team from the first film returned for this one, I expected this one to be just as good as the first film, even though it is universally agreed that the adult section of both the book and miniseries are inferior to the kids section. That statement does still hold true, even though this film is mostly decent. The strongest thing It Chapter 2 has going for it is the performances. James McAvoy and Jessica Chastain are very good in their roles as Bill Denborough and Beverly Marsh. Jay Ryan is good as Ben Hanscom, even though I feel like his character was weaker this time around. Isaiah Mustafa is surprisingly great as Mike Hanlon, since I mostly know Mustafa for being the Old Spice guy. But the two best performances in the film are Bill Hader and James Ranson as Richie Tozier and Eddie Kazbrak. Bill Hader as Richie is perfect casting, and he definitely brings a lot of humor to the film, while also playing the dramatic moments his character has very well. James Ranson channels his younger counterpart so well that I felt like I was watching Jack Dylan Grazer all grown up, and his chemistry with Bill Hader is one of the highlights of the movie. Bill Skarsgård returns as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, and his performance is fantastic. Like in the first film, he has this sweet, childlike innocence to him, but is also very creepy at the same time. This film shows a more playful side of Pennywise that we didn't get to see much of in the first film, which makes him a little less terrifying than he was before, but Skarsgård gives it his all to elevate those scenes. Sadly, he appears less frequently than he did in the previous film, so those scenes are few and far between. Other positives about It Chapter 2 is that the direction by Andy Muschietti is once again very solid, and he clearly has a lot of passion and care for the source material. The cinematography is also good, even though I feel like it's a step down from the previous film. There are, however, some really creative scene transitions that were very impressive, and I feel like the film could have used more of them. The musical score by Benjamin Wallfisch is once again excellent, and each piece of music is used just about perfectly in every scene. Lastly, there are some good scares in this film, and Muschietti knows how to craft a good scare, but I do have some complaints with the scares that I'll get into later. Speaking of complaints, let's get into them since I have a lot of them. It Chapter 2's biggest flaw is without question its runtime. This film runs at a hefty 2 hours and 49 minutes, when it absolutely did not need to. There are many scenes and flashbacks in this film that add nothing to the story and feel like filler to pad the length of the movie out. I won't get into spoilers, but there are many scenes in the film that either go on for too long when they don't need to, or happen, and are never brought up again. There's one scene in particular near the beginning of the movie that was one of the best scenes of it, but it never got mentioned or brought up again after it happened, so it felt pointless when I think it would have been something great if they followed up on it. The film contains way too many flashbacks as well. I'm fine with a few to establish who these characters were 27 years ago, but it gets to the point where there's so many of them that they feel repetitive and unnecessary. They honestly feel like deleted scenes from the first movie just inserted into this movie, and most of them contain information that we already knew from the first one, so I don't see the point in why we needed them. They also de-aged the kid actors from the first film in this one, since they grew up 2 years between the films, and the effects were very distracting. The worst example of this film's de-aging effects is with Finn Wolfhard. Since the last one, he must have grown much older and taller than any of the previous cast members. He looks like plastic throughout the whole film, and it distracted me greatly. It Chapter 2 also has some major pacing issues. The first act of this film feels very rushed, and doesn't really give any of the adult losers much characterization outside of one scene each. The second act is very slow and takes its time with all the flashbacks and characters on their quest. The third act is paced better than the first two, but it's still not perfect. It all felt very clunky and disjointed, which shocked me considering how perfectly paced the first one was. Chapter 1 was 2 hours and 15 minutes long, but I never felt the length because the film was paced so well, it knew what was important to tell, and the characterization was just about perfect. It felt like the filmmakers just put too much stuff in this film and didn't really know how to tell a good story. Another problem I have with this film are some of the scares. As I stated earlier, there are some really well done scares, but there are also some scares that are ruined by comedic moments that took me out of the movie. None of the scares in the first film ended in a comedic moment, so I don't see the reason why this film did it so often. Some of the scares were so ridiculous and goofy that they reminded me of an Evil Dead movie. There's one scare in this movie that made my jaw drop with how jarring and blisteringly stupid it was. I don't consider the It films to be some of the scariest movies ever made or anything, but at least the first one did a great job of crafting really well executed scares. This one feels more like a horror comedy than anything. Overall, It Chapter 2 is a decent movie, but it was a disappointment to me as a fan of both the first movie and the book. There's a lot to like about this film, but it's way too long, suffers from poor pacing, and doesn't contain as many good scares as the first film did. This was one of my most anticipated movies of the whole year, and honestly let me down more than any other movie I've seen this year. Yes, there are worse movies I've seen this year, but this was the biggest disappointment, since the first movie is one of my favorite movies of 2017, and is one of my favorite Stephen King adaptations to date. Chapter 2 is still a watchable movie, and can be fun at parts, but I just wish it had the same level of quality and enjoyability of the first installment. It Chapter 2 gets a B-.